All right.
We are live. Welcome to another episode of Livelunch. We've got some new posters on the backdrop. Thank you to all the artists who helped create these wonderful pieces of art.
I've got to say, this is one of my favourite graphics that we've had for series.
The vulture?
Well, no, just the concept, the pictures. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
So, well done.
Yeah, there's lots of things that are going through my mind, but I don't know what to say and what not to say. I did wonder whether having vultures on the screens would be distracting.
People poke fun at them and make light of them. Was that what your concern was?
Well,
Which may have happened on another video we did.
I did get one message saying, why vultures? I said, well, that's not going to be the most controversial thing you're going to come across in this series.
Well, quite.
Yeah.
No. Well, it's about life and death, isn't it?
Exactly.
That's what I got from it.
That is the obvious.
And that's the great thing about art. Starts a conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which, yeah, that's what
I do appreciate. I do really like it when not everybody agrees with what we produce, because then we can have the conversation.
Just like what we set out to do on here on Livelunch. Everyone's going to agree.
So we've had a busy week.
Actually, I thought it was the three vultures from Disney. You know, Dumbo.
Jungle Book.
We're your friends.
Dumbo.
Isn't it Dumbo?
Jungle Book.
Your friends. Oh, right. Yeah, Jungle Book then.
It's a long time ago, that film.
There are vultures in Dumbo as well, aren't there? No, they're ravens.
Oh, I don't know.
They're blackbirds, right? Or crows.
Anyway.
No, isn't that the Jungle Book? There's ravens.
No. Jungle Book is the three vultures
messaging.
who do the dance.
They do what?
They dance, don't they? I don't know. How about you? I don't know. Oh my gosh, terrible. Need to watch Jungle Book again.
That's an action point in this meeting. Anyway,
we've had lots of stuff has happened in our lives this week. One of the fun things was we started our small groups.
Yeah.
WeAreEmmanuel, and I'm leading a small group. We're all involved with our Thrive set of small groups. And so I lead the Thrive Everyday small group, which is, we looked at discipleship. This week, it's a group of us going through a set of
teachings. Wisdom from above. If the above is Matt Carvel. And Christine and a range of people. I'm making fun of
but so our Thrive is the small groups where we really invest in our congregation, invest in people who are part of Emmanuel. And yeah, so we had our first small group this week, and we talked about discipleship and how you can put disciplines into your life that help you draw close to God and cultivate a fruitful life with God without falling into the danger of legalism, which is where you believe you've got to do certain things to please God. And it was a really wonderful conversation.
Brilliant. I mean, I think we labour this at the beginning of this, because small groups I think it's an exciting point for us at church when we start small groups again, because different churches do different small groups in different ways, and where we used to do it, you're in a small group, and that was a small group in for a long season, and there's benefits of that. I think where we're at now with Emmanuel small groups is we have a whole range of different types of small groups, and it's more sort of an opt-in. You can choose which one you want to do, but we have that range. So whether you just want to make some friends and invite people into the church community, interest focus groups. We've got alpha groups. I think there's 5 different alphas running across the church, some online, some in person, which is really exciting. And then other small groups, people meeting in their homes and that sort of thing. And then we have at the other end, we have the Thrive, which is more sort of content driven, aimed at stretching, encouraging, discipling our members in their walk with Jesus. And so Christy and I were both involved at Thrive Story as well at the weekend, at different times actually. You popped in on Saturday and then left, and then I came in. But I saw your board that you'd written on things. It looked good. Good. Well received as well. So
that's all good.
And whilst you were doing...
Thrive Story.
Thrive Story. Anything to say about Thrive Story?
I just think it's just such a great group to be part of, especially, I think it's easy to think that all Christians have got it all together, or other Christians have, but not me. And actually, Thrive Story is a place where you can work through anything and find freedom during the course of that, and with others, and hear their story and see what God's doing in their lives.
Do you talk about Livelunch on your Thrive Story?
Sorry?
you talk about Livelunch and
experience,
Livelunch experience, having to deal with.
Do it after the series. Okay. Both of us will have to.
Yeah. I
just said things that people didn't receive what I just said. It was never valued. That's what I would say. Carry on, Christine.
Christine always shuts me down.
Shall I talk about Thrive Study?
Yes, please do.
I think another thing that people often struggle with is how to actually study their Bible.
Yeah.
Because we talk about it a lot, but what these groups are for is to really encourage people and show them skills that they can use to study their Bible for themselves, which is the most important thing people can learn to do. And we all need to do that, but it's done through the means of going through a book of the Bible with a structured study, but drawing out the skills, so that by the end of doing one of our Thrive study groups, which we now have for men and women, you'll be equipped with a whole list of skills that you can then put into practice yourself. So that's really exciting, I think, because we want to be a church of people who really know our Bibles.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kickstarted Thrive last week. So is it too late for people to sign up to a Thrive small group now?
You know what? I think almost all of our Thrive groups
it's closed. Wow, sorry, you may have missed.
So popular.
Wow.
I think there's one Thrive every day.
Okay.
So the same way you're doing, but you don't have to do it with Yohaan. You can do it with someone else. And that group is starting on Monday.
Oh, okay.
Thrive every day with Mike and Susie. So
Brilliant.
that's still on if you go to /
But we're doing that next term as well, so you can...
Yeah, and actually you can sign up for both the study groups and express interest in study and story.
Yes, you can for next.
Now on the small group list. You can put your name down for next time so that we can make sure that you get into the groups.
And whilst the two of you were doing Thrive Story and changing people's lives on Saturday, I was having one of those core memory moments in my life on Saturday. Right. I was supposed to go to Belfast on Saturday for a work trip, come back Sunday evening, and on Friday afternoon I get a message from my dear friend Jacob Fortescue. Said, what are you doing on Saturday afternoon? And I was like, I'm in Belfast. He's like, I've got tickets to the Brighton Man United game. And I said, I'm going to change my trip. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Okay.
So I did.
Do the people in Belfast know this? That you?
Yeah, everybody knows it. They mentioned the result multiple times during their service, and poked a lot of fun at me. Okay. I am a Manchester United fan. Anyways,
so what, you went Saturday evening?
So I went to watch the football on Saturday, which is amazing. I loved it. Yes, the result didn't go my team's way. I got to see Cristiano Ronaldo play. That's cool, isn't it? I can tell my kids that and my grandkids. Okay. So anyway, I saw these guys play. I saw them get absolutely battered by Brighton. I was in the Brighton stand, and I think people behind clocked that I was a Manchester United supporter. So I just got ripped into the whole time. It was fun. It was just a great atmosphere. Thank you, Jacob, for the ticket. And then, but the funny thing was, Stephen Dawson, who is my boss or line manager, I thought I probably should tell Stephen that I'm doing this, and I've changed my ticket from Saturday to Sunday morning. I had to get to church on time, and I knew there was an early morning flight, which meant I had to wake up at 3 a.m, get to the airport station at 4 to catch a flight to get there in time for the morning. So I'm well up for doing this, and I'll get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, I should probably tell Stephen. Do you know what? He wouldn't even know that I changed my plans.
Right.
Guess who turns?
There's a moral of this story. Come on.
Guess who turns up at the football?
Is it Stephen Dawson?
It was Stephen Dawson. I was like, oh, hey man. He's like, aren't you supposed to be in Belfast? I was like, Manchester United. Like, yeah, he was gracious and he understood. But yeah, I've been getting a lot of stick about this whole plan that I missed out on this trip.
Wow.
Early morning flights.
You tried
to cut a corner and you got...
Yeah. Talking about cutting corners, there are some key things that are happening in the world today. We've got, Agatha Christie, which kickstarts today.
One of the things we try and do sometimes on Livelunch is engage with the burning issues culturally, and the thing, how should Christians navigate the post-Christian culture that we live in. So sometimes we take stories from the news. What's probably more interesting is the conversations that we have about what should we feature and what we shouldn't feature, and what we should talk about, what we shouldn't. Obviously, there's horrendous things going on in the world right now, as there always is, and so it's not that we ignore those stories in terms of Ukraine war and that sort of thing, but we try and pick up stories that engage in sort of culturally.
Just get to the point, man. You're like, ethical, people get it.
People get. So we had a discussion on whether Agatha Christie was the main.
If you're listening to this on the podcast,
you don't have to explain.
Check out the video because you want to see Christine's expression right now. That's the kind of that's money right there.
What that story is, but I'm saying you don't have to explain because everyone knows that this is the trial starts today about whether Rebecca Vardy is responsible for the Instagram leak of Colleen Rooney and the stories and leaked to the papers. And I think it's a big issue. Do you not think it's a big issue? No.
I don't think it's a big issue, no. I think it's terrible, the waste of money that's going into this for people to try and protect reputations when if your yes is yes and your no is no in the first place, and if you're full of integrity in the first place, you wouldn't need to get there. But
it's interesting to think whether it would have the momentum that it has if it hadn't had such a witty reference point.
Yeah, it's genius.
Because even in the BBC article about it, sorry, I'm just talking about it now. Even in the BBC article about it features the person who just like came up with that on Twitter. And she's just like a normal person. She just was the first one to say it. But somehow the BBC News is like picked up and like point to her like she came up with it, and everyone's like she's almost like a celebrity in and of herself now, just for coming up with a witty thing on Twitter.
Brilliant.
I mean, who knows? Like millions of people come up with supposedly things.
What do we think, Christine? Where do you think this court is good? This court case is going to land?
Very careful.
You know, is it?
Follow the story.
Who do you think is going to be guilty? Not guilty? What are your thoughts on that?
I just don't care. I don't know why you two are so interested in it. I'm much more interested in integrity in public life.
Wow. Okay.
So
go on.
The Beergate story or something like that.
Let's talk about the Beergate story.
Yeah, let's.
Over to you, Christine.
Well, I mean, because obviously, from the biblical point of view, integrity is important, and we talk about honesty. I mean, if you had listened carefully to that yourself, you mean your story from Brighton, not walk with integrity there, have you?
Well, it was Manchester United.
So there is excuses. Anyway, I think we should move on. Should we move on?
Well, okay. Are we?
Yeah. Let me do.
Are we not talking about Beergate? I thought the points that were raised were quite interesting about integrity in the public place, and you both had strong opinions a few minutes ago before we went live. Are we going to share those strong opinions, or are we going to move on to other things?
It is an interesting. I think it probably is healthy every time. It's interesting that how important integrity is. I mean, we're teaching one another in the church. We're teaching our children about integrity and honesty, and living a gospel life. And so and you wonder whether culturally have we moved on from that? Are people more cynical about that sort of thing? And even for Keir Starmer this week to sort of make a very clear, I'm doing this for integrity. If I get fined, I will resign. And people say, well, it's politically motivated. He's just playing tricks. It's just all games. He's trying to put the pressure on Boris Johnson, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think we should just take notice when about our leaders and how they handle themselves and what they promote. I think because it does seem that there is an erosion of morality from leadership, and it just keeps going further and further down.
I think it's important to take responsibility for our actions, and I think that in public life generally we don't see that. There used to be a time when people would resign over issues where they felt that they'd failed in some way, but now there doesn't seem to be any kind of concern about that. It doesn't seem to be so important, but I think it is important because people are modelling something. They are our representatives and they do model something. So I think it is important. I think it's difficult to know in this case whether this is to put pressure on Boris Johnson, but at least here's somebody who's saying, if I have done wrong, I am going to take responsibility for it.
I mean, it is fascinating because especially from a sort of Christian point of view, I mean, in this country, politics is not as polarised in terms of a Christian point of view. So there'll be people watching this who are from who are Christians in our church and probably from every political persuasion or in terms of who they vote for, that sort of thing. And it reminds me of, obviously, in the States before when there was Donald Trump and the religious right and the Christians and the argument of, well, we're not electing a pastor, we're electing a leader. And so do you hold leaders to a moral, standard? And is that what you base?
That's a really great question. Do you hold leaders to a moral standard? Do you think you should hold political leaders to a moral standard?
It's really tricky, and especially when you think about what's happening now in the US.
Yeah.
So part of the argument We'll get on to Genesis in a minute. This could be the best or the worst episode of Lifelunch we've ever done. But part of the argument for Christians sort of being pro-Donald Trump was that, well, there's an important seat on the Supreme Court and he's responsible for electing someone to that. So from a conservative point of view, make sure a Republican gets in so there's a conservative. I'm not saying I advocate that, I'm just saying that's what was coming out from many Christians in the States at the time. Trump's come and gone. But there is now a majority of, conservatives on the Supreme Court, if I understand it correctly, the judges.
Five of the 9.
And then this issue of abortion and overturning the, Roe versus Wade precedent and the legal right to abortion at a federal level, that's being questioned and possibly overturned. Which probably many Christians in the US would be very supportive of and think that's a very good thing. We're not going to get into that whole discussion, but it is an important issue for Christians. But that's really significant because in one sense, this is what many Christians said at the time, even though we don't like things that Donald Trump says or the way he's conducted himself, we'll vote for him because he'll do this for us and this will be in our interest. So it's really complicated.
It is.
I've talked about the issue without not being too unhelpful.
Yeah, we did like talk about the issue, didn't we? We said it's the kind of thing that you don't just want to have off the cuff. You want to have a really thought through conversation, response, and with a range of voices and experiences who can then feed into the conversation and the discussion. But I guess in this instance, with the massive leak that's happened from the Supreme Court, quite like in some ways unprecedented. You don't really have leaks from the Supreme Court this way, and the sanctity within which the legal system is, I guess, protected. A year of leaks from the White House and other political institutions because they leak information to gauge the public's pulse on the scenario. But the timing of it is really interesting because we're just about to go into the midterms, and has this been put out now to rally the troops and to get people voting in the midterms? And so I guess some is political leaders surely they must have known that the morality of the discussion would play a key part, and using somebody their integrity to sway voters and to sway votes. And so how do we work with that?
Yeah, I know it's tricky, and obviously the US is not our context. We're not in the US, and whatever happens in the US doesn't necessarily affect what happens in our country. But in this country is largely culturally a sort of Western democratic society, and so it is interesting the fact that we have, like in the US, we have experienced since the 60s a progressive liberal independent sort of individualistic ethic to life and that sort of thing that has led to where we are now in terms of the church's voice on moral issues is very marginal in our society. But the idea that a very conservative view on an ethical issue could actually gain some traction, which is what happened. And now the US is very different to us in terms of structurally and that sort of thing. But that's just interesting. I just think, as Christians, we should probably be watching carefully about what happens. I think Christians should think about the issue of abortion carefully. It is very complex, but we shouldn't shy away from it. It's a real issue. Affects all of us, affects society. The Bible has some important things to say. It should shape the way we think about it, wherever exactly we land. We should be, as Christians, being shaped in our thinking by the Bible, and be careful not to be shaped by other factors and other influences in the world.
It does feel like these are big cultural moments that are happening in our history. You had Elon Musk buying Twitter and what that meant for society and culture as a whole. Which again,
was that a big cultural moment for you, Christine? Do you not feel the seismic shock of that when it happened? How much did you pay for it? 42 billion?
Yeah, something like that.
Quite a lot.
40 or 44 billion. Yeah. It's a lot of money, isn't it?
I think is that such a big amount of money we can't actually conceive how big that is. It is, from a maths perspective.
Yeah, for all the reasons.
Anyway.
And then we've got this that's about to happen.
The significance of that is all about free speech.
Yes, absolutely.
All about, it's not just a rich person bought something that's very expensive.
But what we were talking about earlier was what has been like progressive democratic society. Is this like a step backwards in terms of what's happening? Yeah. And so, and I guess these are big moments that just changed our cultural temperature.
Yeah. They are. And I think we'll probably just wrap this up and talk about the Bible in a second, because we're going to get 10 minutes to go. But I want to encourage, if you have questions, I think we've sort of skirted around a lot of topics there, but actually it does help us if people who are watching this would like us to speak on different topics or have a specific question. It just helps us to know. We want to serve people in this conversation, not just have a conversation because we find it interesting. So if there are specific questions that people have or would like us to cover things, we'll do our best to try and...
I'm changing plan live on air, so welcome to behind the scenes of Livelunch. There's two big questions that we did want to talk about from the preach earlier, which aren't... If you want to look at, there's some really helpful practical small group questions which would help you go deeper into what Matt preached on Sunday. But I wonder if we pick up the two questions. The first question about actually what Christine, you asked, how to actually hold on to God in time of adversity. And then the question about the patriarchy and how that's viewed.
Okay.
So let's just look at those two questions. We've got 10 minutes. We might run over, but that's okay. These are good, interesting things to talk about. Do you want to do a quick summary of your preach, 30 seconds, really
super quick? It's Genesis 26. It's about Isaac. Isaac is the son of Abraham. He goes through a season of famine, but in that season of famine, God speaks to him and renews the covenant promise that he had made to Abraham. And then we hear about how Isaac failed, he sinned, he did something very bad, deceptive, but yet God protects him from the consequence of that, and then blesses him and his family materially and in a really big way, and that's great. So it's got God's blessing and God's grace to us in the famine season and faced with our failure as well. That's kind of what I was focusing on. And Christine, you have a great story from your own personal experience of actually holding on to God's blessing and God's goodness in a very dark season. So tell us about it.
Some years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and obviously that was a difficult time. There was all sorts of emotions to deal with at that time, not least the fear that I might die or anything like that. But I had a group of people praying for me, and somebody had a prophetic word for me, which is kind of what that is when God speaks to them and gives them something to say for me. And she talked about the fact that what was behind it was that we can think about our lives. If we compare ourselves with others, we can see other people getting good things happening to them, but we may not. And we can kind of think, well, it's some kind of lucky dip. And she said that she saw in this picture that she saw that I had this purple velvet bag, and it was a lucky dip. But when I put my hand into the bag, I didn't get the cheap plastic toy. Now, I think some of us think like that's what life gives us. And that's not really in line with biblical teaching. Yeah. But inside this bag, and this is a very special bag, there are all these slips. And on every single one, it says the word goodness. I don't know if you can see that. So the picture was that whenever I put my hand in the bag, all I could ever get from it was goodness. And that actually is what we get from God. So I would go to appointments and things like that with my hand in the bag, clutching on to the goodness of God. Now that's a picture of what we need to do. You won't all have a goodness bag, but we all have the Bible and the promises and the truth of God. And what we have to do in times of adversity is dig down into what we already know of God and the things he's already done for us. You know, in the Old Testament, they talked about putting up a memorial. And the reason they did that was to remember. And we need to remember that God is good, even if our circumstances don't look like it. Because we don't know what God is working in us through those circumstances. And I tell you, I've never doubted the goodness of God since then. And I can always talk to people about the fact that God is always good.
Yeah. Amazing. And that's a very visual thing, very tangible thing. And even in that story, incidental thing of having other people around you to speak words of encouragement. Because when we go through, whether it's because of ill health or other circumstances, very dark times, sometimes we need other people to tell us the truth that we know somewhere deep down there, but actually our emotion, our mind is so heavy with the circumstance we're in. Yeah,
it's a bit like when Moses was praying when the Amalekites were fighting against the Israelites, and he kept going for a while, but then his arms started to drop, and Aaron and Hur came alongside him and held up his arms until they won the battle. And sometimes we need people, in a sense, to hold up our arms for us, and that's not a wrong thing. We're designed for a relationship with each other, and we're designed to be able to comfort, help, encourage, teach, whatever it is, with one another.
Do you want to go to the second question?
Yeah.
What was it again?
You were going to ask Christine a question about... Yeah.
Oh, well, okay, yeah. So the second, I mentioned in I Preach about sometimes so passages like this, and it happened with Abraham's story as well. So we're right throughout Genesis and the Old Testament, and probably the New Testament as well. There are examples of where women are treated very poorly. And I don't think anyone would argue over the fact that what is described in the Old Testament is a patriarchal society. When we call it the patriarchs, these different men. But we live in a time now where, for many people, they would see patriarchal as a very negative. It can only be as a pejorative word, as patriarchal, therefore it's bad. And so I was kind of making the point that in this example, when we understand what's going on here, Isaac is not being held up as, he treated his wife in this way, in a frivolous way at best, and actually very sinfully horrendous way. And we shouldn't think, God's cool with that. No, actually, what's describing here is actually sinful behaviour. I don't really know what the question is from that, but
I mean, because we've had these conversations plenty of times, but there could be people watching who haven't been a part of this conversation, and I think just hearing what Christine, how do you feel when you read these stories?
Well, what I would say is whenever we read any part of the Bible, we need to think about context. And the context here is an ancient people. We're in ancient history. And it's not just in the Bible that there were patriarchal societies. There were patriarchal societies all across, certainly the Middle East at this time. And actually, those patriarchal societies were a form of protection to women at the time, because women had no agency, they weren't as physically strong as men, and actually coming under that actually was a form of protection. But of course, anything like that is subject to abuse. Any kind of authority relationship is subject to abuse. And it doesn't mean to say that what we're seeing here is a good example being modelled, because you have to think about, Sarah. I think about Sarah in this situation. Think about how on earth would she feel? Not Sarah. It's Rebecca. It's Sarah the time before who went Abraham, into Pharaoh's household, didn't she?
Yeah, down in Egypt.
It happened twice.
Anyway, but it's wrong, and we only have to look at the New Testament to see that a husband should lay down his life for his wife to know that this is wrong. We don't just read this with as though we don't know the rest of the Bible. We have to compare scripture with scripture. That's a good principle, and that way we come to understand that actually this is here for our teaching, and that just because it's an example, it's not necessarily not an example of what is good.
Yeah, and I think just very quickly on that, you know, that I think that does correspond. The New Testament teaching about husband and father laying down his life for his wife and his family. In one sense, you could read that into the promise that's actually just come to Isaac in the beginning of chapter 26, because I mentioned in the sermon, God was saying, I'm going to bless your family.
Yes.
It's not like I'm going to bless you specifically, like your family. And there's a whole chapter that we looked at 2 weeks ago about Rebecca and where she comes from and how she came to be part of the story. Like it's really significant, and it's them together that God is going to bless. It's through their family, through their, you know, you can.
How do you?
Wife are required in order to have children.
Yes. I think to not put too fine a point on it. There is the. I think you mentioned this in the conversation that we had earlier, is that you do have an example of a man who walked with integrity, and he said, I'm not touching this woman, please take her back. And you, so where Isaac thought, oh, these men will take my wife forcibly from me, that was a wrong assumption, that there are actually men who will stand up for what is right and say, no, I'm not doing that. Because that is very wrong. And
and the thing is that Isaac was driven by fear. That's what was underlying this decision.
Absolutely. I think, in this instance, Abimelech shames Isaac by his conduct.
Yes.
But I guess my last question. So in this story, you see Isaac treating his wife really badly, but it does seem to end really well for him. And in some ways you're like, but God, why was there no justice unto, you know, why was he still blessed 100-fold when he treated his wife so badly? As a woman reading that story, how do you feel towards God or the story when you read it?
I think you just have to come back to the gospel and the fact that none of us has, we've all been an Isaac. Haven't we? In different situations, we've all done the wrong thing. We've all acted out of fear. I wouldn't necessarily see it through the lens of men and women necessarily here in that way, and that none of us deserves mercy, but God is so merciful to all of us, and his grace abounds to all of us, and his grace still abounded to Rebecca, even though this had happened, and she was protected and preserved in a bad situation. So I think I'd steer clear of, coming down on one side or the other in that kind of way. But I think we always have to see things through the lens of the gospel and who I am. I am somebody who was a sinner, and I've been saved by grace. It's like Matt was talking about on Sunday about mercy, that we don't get what we deserve, but we get grace.
We get the opposite.
We get the opposite.
There you go. It's finished.
Brilliant. Wow, that was a long episode of Livelunch. Well, it wasn't that long, but it was wonderful to chat with
Maybe it
you
felt
again.
long.
Thank you so much for joining us on Livelunch, and we'll be back next... Oh, wait, I'm not around next week. I am in Poland next week. So I won't be around next week, but have fun.
We'll work out what happens next week. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.